Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another video. Today we've got a really sad case to talk about. It's the murder of 19-year-old Faith Hedgepeth. So Faith was born on September 26th, 1992, and she was only 19 when she was found murdered in her apartment in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She was a junior at the University of North Carolina, and she was born in Warren County, North Carolina, to part of the Haliwa-Saponi Native American tribe. I'm really sorry if I said that wrong. She dreamed of one day becoming a doctor and going back to her community to help out. She was very much a family girl. She only ever wanted to help her community. She wanted to be successful to help them. Her mother named her Faith because when she found out she was pregnant with her, she was in a troubled marriage and already had two teenage, pretty much grown up daughters. So Faith was the baby of the family and she was very loved. Faith lived in an off-campus apartment with her roommate Karina Rosario, who I'm going to refer to in this video as Rosario because it seems like most of the people in her life did so. And for a short amount of time they also lived with Karina's boyfriend, Eric Tacoy Jones. However, Jones was abusive to Rosario and eventually they broke up and Eric moved out. However, he kept trying to break into the apartment. He threatened both Rosario and Faith on multiple occasions, and eventually Faith drove Rosario to the court to get a protective order against Jones. The day before Faith's death was September 6th, 2012. On that day she had a full day of classes, so she went to university as usual and then attended a rush for a sorority that she was hoping to join. This sorority that Faith wanted to join was historically Native American, and so she clearly felt a lot of connection to her roots. She left the rush at about 7:15 to go to the library with her roommate Rosario, and they stayed there, from what I can gather, until about 11. I think Faith left earlier and then came back to pick Rosario up. They headed back to their apartment together, and at about 12:30 they decided to go out for the night, so they headed to a nightclub in downtown called The Thrill. Now, although they were both only 19, this particular club let under 21s in just to dance, and that's what they did. They arrived about 12:40 and spent about an hour and a half dancing before security cameras caught them leaving about 2:06 AM. Rosario later told police that they had left because she had an upset stomach and wasn't really feeling it and wanted to leave. So they arrived back to their apartment at about 3 AM and it is thought that Faith was still alive by about 3:40 because there are texts recorded on her phone. At 3:40 AM, Faith was trading texts with Brandon Edwards, who some sources said was a former boyfriend of hers. Some people just said it was an acquaintance. I'm not really sure, but clearly she knew this Brandon Edwards guy. The text said, sorry, I'm going to read it from my notes here so I don't get it wrong. It said, "Hey B, can you come over here please? Rosario needs you more, aha. You know, please let her know you care." And about 3 minutes later, she sent another text that just said the word than, and it's thought that than was a correction for in her previous text. I think maybe it auto-corrected saying aha when it meant to say than. And this is thought to be the last evidence that shows when Faith was alive. Now, Brandon didn't reply for about another 36 minutes. He replied at 4:16 AM, sending a reply asking who the text was from. Now, this is what makes me think that maybe Brandon wasn't a former boyfriend of hers, because surely he would have had her number, but maybe he changed phones, I'm not really sure. Like I said, the two arrived home from the club about 3 AM, and the neighbour downstairs was just watching TV in her apartment, and she said that she heard about 3 loud bangs around this time. She said it sounded maybe like a heavy bag being dropped or furniture being overturned, but she didn't really think much of it at the time. Phone records show that around the same time that Faith was texting Brandon, Rosario was also trying to call him, and he wasn't answering. Obviously he didn't reply to Faith's text about half an hour later. So when Brandon didn't reply to Rosario, she called a friend of hers, Jordan McCrary, who was a soccer player they knew. Now, bearing in mind that the two of them had left the club quite early because Rosario said that she had a stomachache, Rosario actually then went out. At about 4:25 AM, Jordan came to pick Rosario up. She leaves the apartment to get in Jordan's car, and she leaves the front door of the apartment unlocked, saying that she believed Faith was asleep in her room at the time. Jordan drove Rosario to the home of an acquaintance they both knew about 5 minutes away, and Rosario spent the rest of the night there and didn't return home until about 11 AM. About 10:30 AM, she called Faith asking for a lift, and obviously Faith didn't answer, so she called another friend, Marisol Rangel. Marisol came to pick her up and they arrived back in the apartment shortly before 11 AM. They called for Faith and Faith didn't answer, and then eventually they went into Faith's room and found her body. Faith was on the floor, leaning up against her bed. Her shirt was pulled up over her face and she was covered with a duvet or a blanket. She had no clothes from the waist down. There was a big pool of blood by her body and blood spatter on the wall and on the closet door. So Rosario is the one to call the police, so she calls 911 and the operator on the other end says to her, "Stay on the line, I don't want you to be alone right now." And Rosario just replies with "okay." Now bear in mind that Marisol was actually there at the same time. I don't know if maybe Rosario was just so shocked that she just wasn't really processing what was happened, so stayed on the phone with him anyway. So this is a very strange case and it was actually very difficult to research because there really isn't that much information about it online. Most of what I got I took from Reddit and from the few media reports that there are online. Most of the articles I read actually coming straight from Native American news sites. So this wasn't picked up by the general media, and I don't want to say it's because Faith was Native American, but it definitely seems that way, which is just a travesty because this is such an interesting case and this girl deserves justice. The details of this investigation were actually not released by the police for 2 years. It was almost exactly 2 years after the date of her death that the police finally released this information. I think a court order ruled that they had to release the details of this investigation because even Faith's parents didn't know how she had died. They knew she'd been murdered but didn't know the details. The police said they didn't publicly release this information because they didn't want to ruin their chances of catching the killer, but I do think after maybe 6 months or so they would have thought, okay, we're not getting anywhere here, maybe we should release the details to the public and they can help. Not 2 years later. The autopsy revealed that Faith suffered from extensive skull fractures. She had cuts all over her face and forehead and her arms and legs had been really badly beaten. The murder weapon in this case has never been revealed. I don't know whether the police just haven't revealed it or if they don't know what it was. But it is pretty clear that she was pretty badly beaten, most likely bludgeoned to death. The police found semen inside of her but couldn't confirm whether she was actually sexually assaulted or not. So there is a chance that Faith had sex earlier in the day, however this is unlikely considering how jam-packed her schedule was that day. The DNA from the semen matched DNA that was found elsewhere in the room. Now in this case there are 2 very compelling, interesting pieces of evidence, and they sort of changed the entire case. So there was a voicemail that Faith left a friend on the night of her death, and now it wasn't an intentional voicemail from what the police can gather. It definitely sounds like a butt dial. Now I'm going to put this voicemail in the description bar down below, so make sure you go and listen to it. This voicemail was also only released to the public in 2014, so 2 years after her death. It was about 3 minutes long and Faith made this accidental butt dial at 1:23 AM. And according to the timeline, this is when Faith was still at the club The Thrill with Rosario. Bear in mind when you're listening to this recording down below that it does have subtitles on it. Now these subtitles are a guess at best because if you actually listen to the recording not looking at the subtitles, it's really not clear what is being said. To me, it just sounds like people enjoying time in the club. She's accidentally called somebody and she's dancing. Maybe she's gone outside to have a talk with friends. It doesn't sound like anything too threatening, but that's just what I hear from it. A lot of people do think that you're hearing an altercation that led to Faith's death. Faith's own dad said that it sounded like Faith was alarmed in the voicemail. Obviously he would have known sort of the tone and the cadence of his daughter's voice, and he said that she sounds alarmed and panicked in the voicemail. Forensic audio expert Arlo West has extensively looked into this voicemail and he said it sounds like Faith is being hurt in this audio recording. She's certainly in trouble. He said that he thinks there's at least 2 men and another woman in there, and he said that she thinks she was dying at the time of this voicemail. Now thinking of the timeline, this was recorded at 1:23 AM and Faith wasn't recorded leaving the club until after 2 AM. So this can't have been Faith's death. However, a lot of people do say that there was a problem, a glitch with phone timestamps at this time. So it is possible that maybe the timestamp is wrong. I find that a bit far-fetched, but of course take your own theories from this. In this voicemail there are some names that are picked up. It sounds like one of the names is Eric and the other name is Rosie. Another very compelling piece of evidence in this case is the note. Now a note was found near her body and it looked like it was written on a scrap piece of paper, maybe ripped from a takeaway food bag. The note says the following words: "I'm not stupid, bitch, jealous." Now the way it's written is very erratic. It says "I'm not stupid, bitch," and then jealous. It's not a flowing sentence. It definitely looks like it was written hastily, maybe with somebody's left hand so people wouldn't be able to figure out who had written it. And there's no blood on this note, considering how much blood there was in Faith's room when she was found dead, which makes people think it was written after her death, or it was written away from the scene of the crime. Whoever had written this note was clearly very angry at being called stupid. And why, after murdering somebody, would you write a note and leave it by the body? Faith's murder was clearly a moment of anger and aggression, and somebody just took it out on her. If you've had a sudden burst of anger and you've killed somebody, you panic and you get out of there. You don't go and take the time to write a note, a very cryptic, odd note, and leave it by the body. A lot of people do think that this note is possibly a red herring used to distract the police, and if it is that, it's clearly worked because so much time and effort has gone into looking at this note. Another thing about this note that I find quite interesting is the use of the word jealous. I don't want to sound like I'm stereotyping here, like I am a woman, but jealousy is usually a trait that is associated with women, like women being jealous of other women, or definitely something used in a romantic setting, not romantic, but maybe when you're competing for a lover's attention. That's kind of the vibe that I get from it. A few other interesting things to note in this case is that Faith's t-shirt was pulled over her face, so whoever killed her, whoever raped her, if she was raped, couldn't see her face, which is something that happens a lot in murder cases when whoever is hurting the person knows the person well. You feel guilty, so you cover their face and you're able to do what you're doing. Now, just last year on the 23rd of September 2016, 2020, which is an ABC News programme, did a DNA profile using the DNA that was found at the scene of the crime. They've released a generated image of what they think the suspect may look like based on his DNA, and the DNA was male, obviously. They said that the person who did this to Faith was very strongly Native American and European mixed, or Latino. They said they had 80% confidence that the killer, or the suspect in this case, would have had olive skin, very few freckles, if any, and dark hair, black hair. So that's all of the interesting evidence that we have in this case. Now let's move on to talking about theories and suspects. Now, the Chapel Hill police haven't named any people of interest in this case at all. However, they have said that they do not believe that this killing was random, just an act of opportunity. They fully believe that whoever killed Faith knew her. They've interviewed over 2,000 people, and of those 2,000 people have done 750 DNA tests, and none of these tests have matched the DNA that was found in the room with Faith. Reportedly, the police have narrowed it down to 10 suspects, and it's actually quite well known or well thought that the police do know who did this to Faith, but they just can't link all the evidence together. The police have said multiple times that this is not a cold case, which leads me to believe that the police probably do know who did this, just don't have enough evidence to pin it on anyone. And in my eyes, they are the worst kind of cases. This leads me back to the Tara Calico case that I talked about a couple of months ago. I'll link it up here, where the police pretty much know who killed her, but they just don't have the evidence to pin it. So you probably know the suspects I'm going to talk about here because it's quite obvious, but I'm going to talk about them anyway. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Eric Tacoy Jones. This is the former boyfriend of Karina Rosario, Faith's roommate. Like I said, Rosario had taken out a protective order against him. He had been trying to break into the apartment multiple times. Him and Karina, or him and Rosario I should say, just didn't have a healthy relationship at all. And it was very well known that Eric was very resentful of Faith, because Faith had pushed Rosario to get the protective order against him. She had actually been the one to drive Rosario to the courthouse to get this order. So Eric kind of hated her. Allegedly, at one point, Eric was on a phone call with Faith and threatened to kill her. And if that's not compelling evidence, I don't know what is. So Faith died in the early hours of September 7th, and on September 6th, Eric had apparently texted a friend and posted on Twitter asking them to forgive him for what he was about to do. Just 3 days after Faith's death, he changed his Facebook cover photo to one of those inspirational quotes, and it said, "Dear Lord, forgive me for all my sins I may commit today. Protect me from the girls who don't deserve me and the ones who wish me dead today." Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody who you have openly threatened to kill in the past has now suddenly mysteriously been murdered, I would be very careful about changing any photo anywhere on the internet to that kind of quote. That immediately puts him in the firing line for suspects. However, Jones's DNA does not match the DNA found at the scene. The next suspect is Karina Rosario, Faith's roommate. A bit of a side note theory here is that Rosario and Faith kind of looked alike. Rosario was Latino and Faith was Native American. They both had olive skin, dark curly hair. There is a chance this could possibly have been a murder of false identity or mistaken identity. However, I do find this unlikely because the fact that the t-shirt had been pulled up over Faith's face makes me think that whoever did this did have a look at the face before doing this. So they probably would have realised who it was before they murdered her. But a lot of people do think that's a possible theory in this case, and I agree, it could be possible. So the theory around Rosario does very much blend in with the theory about Eric. So clearly Rosario and Eric Jones had a very turbulent relationship, and maybe Faith was just caught in the middle. Eric was clearly a very manipulative person, and maybe he'd managed to persuade Rosario that maybe Faith needed teaching a lesson. Maybe Faith and Rosario did run into Eric at the Thrill nightclub that night, and maybe Rosario and Eric had a talk. Which is why they suddenly left the club and they returned home, and then Rosario left the apartment, leaving the door unlocked. At which point there's possibility that Eric went into the apartment to scare Faith, maybe follow through on the threats he had made in the past. Maybe Rosario knew exactly what he was going to do, or maybe she just thought that Eric was going to scare Faith a little bit. But I definitely do think that if Eric was involved, then Rosario was also very much in the know. Like I said before, the note definitely seems like it comes from a female perspective or a lover's perspective. It's also very possible that Karina left the scene of the crime to go stay at a friend's house as an alibi, and if it is an alibi, it worked. Karina also didn't go to any of the vigils or even Faith's funeral. Now, I don't know how close these two were. I'm assuming if they're roommates, they were very close, and I'm sure if I came home ever and found my roommate murdered in our apartment, I would be a mess and I would not want to probably attend any vigils. I probably would attend the funeral. But if Rosario is totally innocent in this case, then there's a good chance she was just really, really upset, and she actually left. She left North Carolina and went back to New Jersey to spend time with family. There's also a good possibility that she avoided these events to avoid the media, but like I said, this didn't get too much media attention. Now obviously Rosario's DNA did not match semen found at the scene because Rosario was a female. So there is a big possibility that if this was Rosario and Eric who had killed Faith, there was definitely a third person involved. The fact that Faith was undressed from the waist down makes me think that she was raped and it wasn't somebody she had slept with earlier in the day. There was definitely a third person here, or maybe there was no third person, it was just one person. Maybe it was a random act. Maybe somebody had watched Rosario leave the apartment and leave the door unlocked and thought, I'm gonna go in and see. I don't know. But the police definitely do think it was somebody who at least was familiar with Faith. However, a random act doesn't match with the very weird, jealous bitch note found at the scene. There's also a very big possibility that whilst they're at the club, Faith rejected someone, and this person took it very badly, followed them back to the apartment, and then entered the apartment after Rosario had left. She was seen earlier that night on CCTV talking to some men outside the club. But this doesn't really have to mean anything. Like, I talk to random people in clubs all the time. Doesn't mean they're gonna follow me back to my flat and kill me. But you know, there's always that one weirdo. There always is. So I'm gonna leave that there. In terms of suspects, that's all I really have. If you have any other interesting theories, please make sure you leave it down below. I'd love to read it. I'll leave all the interesting links and stuff down below, so if you want to read up on this case even more, then that'll all be down there. And like always, if you've got any cases that you want me to cover, let me know and I'll add it to my long list, and I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually. So thank you so much for watching. Bye guys.